Hello everyone, welcome to Asura Psych, and today we're going to be talking about the differences between the INTJ and ENTJ personality types. Do you find yourself getting stuck between these two types, or maybe you have a friend who might be one of those two types and you're not sure? Well, today we're going to go over the cognitive functions of these types and how they play out in each of the function slots. Speaking of NTJs though, this coming Wednesday, the 2nd of February at 6 p.m., I'm going to be doing a group coaching session designed for NTJs. And you are free to sign up. There's only going to be 10 slots though, and it is a paid coaching session. I've wanted to do more group coaching for a while now because I know individual coaching can be expensive and unaffordable for some people. So this coming Wednesday, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, I'm going to be doing an NTJ focused group coaching session. And then the following day, on the Thursday, I'm going to be doing an NFJ focused coaching session, group coaching session. So if you want to see what group coaching is like, you want to meet other NTJs or NFJs, consider signing up for one of those next Wednesday, the 2nd and 3rd at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Let's get into the video. So, ENTJs and INTJs. What are the key differences between these types? Well, they actually share all the same cognitive functions. So if you don't know what cognitive functions are, you're probably going to need to go get a refresher on those before you come to this video. But INTJs and ENTJs share introverted intuition, extroverted thinking, introverted feeling, and extroverted sensing. The primary difference, though, is that the INTJ leads with introverted intuition and has secondary extroverted thinking, while the ENTJ is the opposite. They lead with extroverted thinking and they have secondary introverted intuition. So what are the primary differences between these two types? Well, the first thing that is important to remember is that ENTJs lead with a rational or judging function, while INTJs lead with an irrational or perceiving function. And if you're newer to MBTI, that might be confusing because you're looking at an INTJ and you're saying, well, they have a J, so why are they a perceiving type? Well, all of the I types are switched when it comes to their P and their J. So INTJs lead with an introverted perceiving function, introverted intuition, and they have extroverted judging as their secondary supporter to that function. While it's opposite for the ENTJs, who lead with an extroverted judging function and have an introverted perceiving function as the secondary supporter to that dominant function. What does that mean? Well, this means that ENTJs are going to be far more decided on average compared to the INTJ. ENTJs are going to be quick to make decisions. They're going to want to organize things as quickly as possible, and they're not going to feel as bad maybe taking control, even if it comes at the expense of other people's opinions. Well, as INTJs tend to hold more of that observer spot when it comes to making decisions. That's why they often get the nickname of the mastermind, because they tend to be behind the scenes, observing, watching, and then when they feel like they have enough information, they will make a decision. And to other people, it can seem like they're ENTJs, because the only time you interact with an INTJ typically, or you see them doing something, is when they're engaging in that extroverted thinking. So it might seem to other people like, oh, he's just using extroverted thinking all the time, because that's all I see from him or her. And in reality, it's more so that's the only thing that they go out into the world to show other people. So it can seem at first like they might be more extroverted or rationally focused than they actually are. Let's go through the function stack one by one and talk about the key differences between the dominant, secondary, tertiary, and fourth position for all the functions within these two types. So first of all is the dominant function. And again, what I just talked about is important here, the idea of decisiveness versus like observation almost. Because ENTJs lead with extroverted thinking, their primary goal in life is often to kind of organize the resources in their external environment. They're very attentive to these things. They are very aware of how things could be in terms of the efficiency or practicality of them. ENTJs are exceptionally practical. They're usually not going to want to waste time doing things that aren't going to lead to some sort of result, especially if it is tied to whatever that they're attempting to achieve through their introverted intuition. Now, INTJs, on the other hand, lead with introverted intuition. And what this means is they're going to take a lot more time processing what it is in terms of their goals, in terms of their visions, in terms of their insights. They're going to take in more information, and they're not going to come to those decisions as quickly. And they might feel like someone like an ENTJ is kind of rushing them to make decisions when they don't have all the information necessarily readily available to them. So the key difference between the dominant functions of these two types is that ENTJs lead with extroverted thinking and kind of want to manage the external resources first and foremost, whereas INTJs, as introverted intuitive dominant types, want to kind of take in information, patterns, abstract concepts, and process them internally first and foremost as their primary way of engaging with the world. Next up is the auxiliary function, the secondary function. This function is often referred to as the tool function, and I kind of agree here, in that it's often kind of used to support the dominant function. And you'll see Jung talk about that when he refers to the auxiliary function in psychological types. It exists to kind of support the dominant function. So what does that look like for an ENTJ? Well, ENTJs are usually very quick to make decisions, but sometimes if they don't feel like they have the information, the bare minimum amount of information needed to make a correct decision, then they're going to stop and try to process for just long enough until they feel like they can come to some sort of abstract conclusion about the decision that needs to be made. They're going to process information, but you have to remember, it exists to serve the dominant function. So as soon as they get what they need, as soon as they've kind of found that insight, found that perception through this introverted intuition function, they're going to race back to extroverted thinking to put it into action, to turn it into something practical, to bring it into reality. The ENTJ is far more concerned with making sure that things are done in the external world, first and foremost, compared to the INTJ, who's going to really take their time and isn't going to do everything that their introverted intuition says is a potential possibility for them to do. So what does that mean for the INTJ as secondary extroverted thinking, for them as a tool function? Well, for INTJs, extroverted thinking is going to be kind of when they see or have a perception that they feel is personable and important to them, they're going to kind of not use, because I don't like the idea of using cognitive functions, but they're going to switch into the frame of reference of using extroverted thinking, processing information through the lens of extroverted thinking, to organize the external world in such a way that it will go towards the thing that they've spent a lot of time processing. And that's going to be the key difference between these two types, is that the INTJ is going to spend a lot more time on singular goals, one singular thing, and they're not going to kind of stretch out their interest as broad as the ENTJ might. So the INTJ has this one thing that they're going to attempt to do, and they're going to use all the external resources available to get to that one thing. The INTJ also doesn't care about the practicality as much as the ENTJ, in that the INTJ might be willing to sacrifice some of that if it will help them get to the NI perception faster. So sometimes INTJs can be a little bit more willing to take shortcuts than the ENTJ, who usually is willing to take things like 1% slower if it's going to be more practical, if that makes sense. There's kind of this weird duality between the two. Another important thing to remember about this secondary function is that because it exists in the opposite energy attitude, say for example, if you're an extroverted type, that means your secondary function's introverted, and it's the opposite for introverts, it's inherently going to be draining. If you are a cognitive introvert, like the INTJ, to go into the frame of thinking and perceiving and deciding of extroverted thinking, you have to drain your mental energy because you're going into extroversion. The same for ENTJs with introverted intuition. If they start processing information through the realm of introverted intuition, it might feel good, it might even feel natural, but eventually they have to come back into their cognitive dominant energy so they can recharge. And that's really important to remember. If you see an INTJ, one key way to differentiate them from an ENTJ is how long can they keep up the extroverted thinking. If the extroverted thinking is all they do, it's more likely to be an ENTJ. If you find that they can do it for, good amounts of time, but then they get burnt out, they kind of have to go back into their shell and recharge, then you're looking at an INTJ more likely. Now we have the tertiary function. And the tertiary function is kind of the weird child in the family. It's hard to explain because it's going to display differently for extroverts and introverts, in my opinion. So what do I mean here? For extroverted types, the tertiary function tends to be something that they kind of like to show off, even if they're not supernaturally proficient at it. It's kind of something that they wish that they were a little bit better at, or they want to kind of be more of their personality. It's not that they can't be good at it or they can't process information in this way naturally, but because it's vying for attention with the first function, it's not going to have as much experience. It's going to be less trained than that dominant function because both of them are in the same attitude. So for an ENTJ who has extroverted thinking first and tertiary extroverted sensing. You can often see this come out in that ENTJs often like to have the objectively valuable kind of things in life. It's very common for them to want like nice cars, for example. They're also going to be much more quick to act in terms of interacting with their environment. They tend to be very confident about their external environment and interacting with it, especially combined with extroverted thinking, which is already making a lot of constant decisions. ENTJs tend to be very willing to kind of show off what they've acquired and what they've achieved compared to the INTJ. The INTJ has tertiary introverted feeling, and for the introverted tertiary types, as opposed to the extroverted tertiary functions, not types, you're going to see that the tertiary introverted functions are going to be kind of shy and reclusive, whereas the extroverted ones are like to be kind of shown off. The introverted ones like to be kind of hidden and kept away. So for INTJs, their introverted feeling is often going to be private, reclusive, and not something that they want to show to the world. But it's still going to be very valuable to them. INTJs are still going to occasionally make introverted feeling decisions over extroverted thinking ones at times because it's natural to them. It's an introverted function. It's in the dominant energy. So you might find that some INTJs are willing to do things that aren't practical if it is something that they personally want because it resonates with them on an introverted feeling scale. Well, you're not nearly as likely to see that with the ENTJ. A great example that I like to use when I've talked about this in live streams and stuff before. I have an ENTJ friend, and he and I play video games a lot together, and he will always pick the absolute best character, weapon, thing, whatever it is that he can pick from, because it's the best. It's the objectively best decision to make. Whereas for me, I'm more willing to pick something that's not going to be the best if I like it more. Say, for example, there's 4 characters I like, and one of them is the best, but I like one of the other ones more than that. I might be willing to pick the one that's just a little bit worse if it's something I really like, and that's going to be the FI making that decision occasionally over TE. The major difference for INTJs is that they usually pick the best option within the things that they like, as opposed to the introverted feeling dominant types who tend to just pick the thing that they like at the complete expense of whatever it is that the best. So for INTJs, it's more like, here's 4 potential items that are very good. This is the one that I like the best of those 4. And even if this one isn't the best of the best, I'm still going to personally choose it. So introverted feeling for INTJs, shy, reclusive, often something that they typically don't want to talk about, whereas ENTJs don't really have that relationship with introverted feeling. We'll talk about that when we get to the repressed function. Finally, we have the repressed function. So the 4th function is what I like to call the struggle area function or the blind spot. And really, this is the opposite of your dominant function. So therefore, it's the thing that you're not really paying a ton of attention to, or if you have to pay attention to it, it's usually stressful. And it's usually going to be the thing that kind of sneaks up behind you and gets you when you're not paying attention. What does this look like for ENTJs? Well, ENTJs, because they have a repressed feeling function, introverted feeling, it usually means that they're not very aware of how they feel towards certain things or how they should act in terms of like their morals or values. They don't spend a lot of time consciously processing this thing. It's very common for ENTJs to ask other people questions like, do you think I made a good decision in terms of like the moral correctness of it? Was that the right thing to do? ENTJs don't ask other people often whether or not it was the most efficient thing to do, but they will ask people, was that a moral thing to do? What do you think about the morality of my actions or the kind of person that I am? Because they're not so certain of that themselves, they tend to outsource it to other people. The 4th function is something that we prefer to outsource if possible because it's stressful for us to process it on our own. So what does that look like for INTJs? Well, INTJs with a perceiving 4th function, it's going to be a little bit different because they're not exactly deciding on things. Remember, perception is irrational, so it doesn't need to come to a decision like the rational functions do. So for INTJs, this tends to show as them just being generally ignorant because of their 4th extroverted sensing function, ignorant of their surroundings, not in terms of ignorant in general. They're going to be struggling to pay attention to the details, to upkeep their environment to a point of cleanliness. Now, INTJs as a J-type are still pretty organized. As you can see behind me, like my living arrangement is pretty organized, but it's not, or clean, but it's not terribly organized. And you're going to find that INTJs get really stressed if they have to over-organize things because they don't want to spend a lot of time interacting with their environment and making sure that they're paying attention to reality around them. INTJs get stressed if they're forced to live in the moment, and you're going to find them kind of escaping into daydreams and mental images if they're forced to kind of be in loud environments or places that are going to be highly stimulating, whereas ENTJs with both extroverted thinking and extroverted sensing are not going to struggle with this typically. ENTJs are usually very okay with being in very high octane and even competitive, loud environments, while INTJs are going to retreat away from these typically. This doesn't mean that INTJs can't enjoy these things ever, but you're going to see that they burn out very quickly and they're going to have to go back to that kind of recharge state. So ENTJs are going to struggle with their feelings and understanding who they are. They're going to want to outsource that to other people, ask others what they think of their morals, actions, these sorts of things, while INTJs are going to be stressed by their environment and living in the moment, and they might even be ignorant of the details that go into making larger decisions based on their introverted intuition. And you might find them working towards something without maybe thinking out the plan of how they're actually going to get there. Instead, they're just kind of like shooting for the stars. In terms of the general archetypes of these two personality types, the ENTJ far more takes on the commander archetype. They're very willing to stand up, take charge, take lead. And the INTJ can do this, but they typically much prefer something like an advisory role or an independent role where they don't feel like they have to take charge of others, but can instead work towards their goals on their own, privately, away from others. ENTJs often enjoy kind of being the leader. They're going to want to take up that position, while INTJs are usually going to not shy away from it, but not be the first person to stand up. Now, INTJs can stand up for leadership positions, and you will see them stand up for leadership positions if it impacts their goals and they don't feel like the people who are going to be picking up the role before them can do it competently. So essentially, if the INTJ sees someone else stand up for a leadership position and that's going to impact their personal NI desires, and that person's not qualified or competent, the INTJ is going to be like, no, stop. Like, hey, look, I need to take charge. And it's not because they want to, it's because they care about the outcome to the point that they're willing to maybe step on a few toes or push other people out of the way to assure that it is achieved. Typically, though, there isn't a disdain for the other person, though. The INTJ is not going to be like angry at the other person unless they ruin the outcome. They're typically just going to be doing it because they care about their NI baby, essentially the vision that they have. They want to ensure that it is brought to some sort of realistic, outcome. Whereas the ENTJ is more so going to be interested in the actual leading, commanding process, where the outcome is more so secondary. The outcome's nice, but they almost get the thrill of living through the leading, taking charge process. Now, not every ENTJ is going to be some commander person, but I think a large majority of them fall into leadership positions, taking charge, giving other people advice, these sorts of things. So those are the key differences between the ENTJ and INTJ personality type. I hope that was able to help you understand these two types a little bit more and maybe the differences between them as well as their similarities. Let me know down in the comment section below if you have any questions regarding this video. Are there any things that you're not so sure about when it comes to ENTJs and INTJs? I'd be more than happy to answer questions if I see them, and I will try to check them out over the course of the next week or two at the very least. Other than that, I would like to remind people again about the group NTJ and NFJ coaching sessions that I'm going to be holding the week after this video comes out, so February 2nd and 3rd, 2022 at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. There's going to be 10 slots for each of these group coaching sessions. If only one person signs up for each, you get an hour of my time all by yourself. So, go check it out if you like. But other than that, I do have personality typing sessions available, as well as individual coaching at my website at sarahsykes.com if you're interested in working with me to find out what your personality type is and what that means for you. This has been Sarah from Sarah Psych. Have a good one.